Hi, good morning. Minister Ron here, Hard Drive Ministries, down in Florida. I wanted to bring to you guys a little bit of a dissection of thoughts. This video in particular that I am highlighting this morning has a lot to do with the purpose behind the book that I'm in the progress of writing now, um, called Dirty Laundry. And the thought process behind this book has a lot to do with what you're going to hear in the discussion that I have up on the screen. And this discussion takes place between uh, a pastor of a church, local church out in Philadelphia, and he is bringing forth a conversation with none other than Pan Africanism, Dr. Umar Johnson. For many of you who are not familiar with Dr. Johnson, you can Google him up. He has tremendous amounts of material on YouTube. He doesn't hide his thoughts at all about the way he sees the African American community, politics, and so on and so forth. But as we teach in our ministry, when people want to bring up the topic of Christianity, that is an open door for ministers like ourselves, if we are equipped to have the right type of dialogue with someone like Umar Johnson, who's going to cover a plethora of issues and concerns that do plague the Black church in particular. So, without further ado, just want you to kind of get the tonality of where this is going. All right, here we go.
With that being said, today is also Sunday, right? And with it being Sunday, there's been a lot of church that's also been going on. Specifically in this conversation, I definitely wanted to focus our conversation on the Christian Black church and kind of dive into a lot of different things about that. So I guess before I get started, I think you're such a passionate person, right? That most people would always wonder what's this guy's spiritual beliefs, right? Like if you're screaming about empowerment, if you're screaming about like socioeconomic issues, why aren't you screaming necessarily about? Well, and you do talk about your spirituality, but so I think some people may wonder what does he believe, right? Prior to doing this interview, I remember we were researching, trying to figure out is he a Christian, is he a Muslim, what's going on? We learned a lot, but I think one of the biggest significant things that I did learn was that you are more focused, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're more focused on the socioeconomic issues versus being focused on like leading with faith. Although you have your personal spirituality that you practice, would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I think spirituality is important because as African people, our heart and soul of existence is our connection with the Creator. At the same time, we have to recognize that organized religion has been a distraction and in many cases could be considered an outright enemy of African progress. More people have been murdered in this world over Islam and Christianity than any other reason. And because of that, when you look at the role that religion played in our enslavement, both Islam and Christianity were used as weapons of enslavement against African people. The Arabs were in the slave trade before the Caucasians were. And so when you look at the justification for slavery in both religions, whether or not it was intended by Jesus or Muhammad to put forth such a doctrine, at the end of the day, nonetheless, both religions co-signed our enslavement and participated in it. I don't have an issue with Christianity. My mother's family is Christian. I don't have an issue with Islam. We were raised Muslim.
Yes.
That's where the name
On your
Umar
father's
comes
side, right?
from. Yes, sir. But at the same time, I see how religion has often served our oppressor much more than it has served us. I think religion is probably the greatest support base for white supremacy against African people than anything else. The fact that every religion, basically, and there's few exceptions, there are exceptions, but there's few, every religion deifies oppression for black people.
What do you mean by deifies?
By deify, when you go to church or you go to the masjid, you're taught that our predicament as African people is divinely ordained. Everything is under the prerogative of God. And if you are a slave or free, if you are an oppressor or oppressed, it's because God set it up that way. So when you go to church, you're told that if you pray enough, if you improve your faith enough, if you donate enough money, God will reverse this. In other words, the big issue I have with Black religion, it posits an external locus of control for Black people. And it's dangerous because an external locus of control says that there's nothing I can do to transform this reality. Something outside of me has to come and liberate me. And the danger of that external locus of control that Islam and Christianity gives to Black people is that it parallels the same external locus of control that slavery gave us. In other words, during slavery, your freedom could only come if your master bequeathed it to you. Your freedom could only come if the government ended slavery with the 13th Amendment. Something outside of you, government, social activism, benevolent white people had to make you free. And so in the church and in the masjid, the logic is the same, although it's not the government or the white man that has to free you, it's God Almighty who has to free you. And because of that, it takes the responsibility off of us to transform our reality, and we give it to the government or we give it to God.
Now, okay.
So this guy, I'll let you listen to him, but I don't think he did the right. I'm just going to come out and say I don't think he did a good enough job expressing the views of true Christianity. And the reason why I'm going to use the constant terminology of true Christianity throughout this particular session is because a lot of the things that Dr. Umar Johnson expressed and is in disagreement, a true Christian is in disagreement as well. The other night, I read off a passage in Matthew. My wife and I were sharing. I'm actually sharing with her, and we were breaking it down. And it got to the part where the apostles were fighting over who was going to be the greatest, who was going to be in charge. In other words, they knew that Jesus' time on the earth was winding down, and they were trying to jockey for the authoritative position, who would be the head apostle, so on and so forth. Sounds familiar? Yeah, it's very familiar because it's the setup of what took place in the Catholic Church, which breathed the life into the office of the papacy. But back to the point of this particular video. In that message, Jesus says, the kingdoms of the world, the Gentile communities of the world, they set their systems up with these hierarchies and these levels of control. He said, but with you, that shall not be so. Ye are all brethren. In other words, what Jesus was saying is that call no man on earth father. You have but one Father, Abba, in heaven, meaning that God is the head over all. And you can't elevate men, not if you're serving me. In truth, if you're serving me, you can't run the Christian setup the same way that the world set up. How do we know that Jesus was very authentic with that? Well, we knew he combated the power structure of his day consistently as it applied to what Dr. Umar is talking about, religion. True Christianity does not teach religion. It teaches the correct relationship with God. So a couple of problems that I have with Dr. Umar. Number one, God is the author of everything. God does give us the power to breathe, not to breathe. He is the ultimate source of control. But to Dr. Umar's point, no, God does not paralyze you in a sense where you don't move with purpose while on this earth. He gives everybody purpose. He gives everybody the ability to act out things in their spiritual destination, right? God has set everybody up to do work while they're here on earth in this timeline. So true Christianity would be consistent with what he's saying, but where Dr. Umar is crossing the line is he's trying to almost do something that happened way, way back in the garden. As a matter of fact, maybe doing something before even the garden, when Satan began to challenge the authority of God. See, what Dr. Umar doesn't realize, whether he maybe he does or maybe he doesn't, is that a lot of the stuff that he's saying has satanic tonality. Remember, Satan was the one that rebelled. Like, I can do all of these things. right? I don't need you. And so then he comes down and he toxins the earth, intoxicates it with all of this blasphemy against God. And that same blasphemy entered into the garden when Adam and Eve were there. Satan pretty much put the same ideology, like you should be able to do everything that God does. So Dr. Umar is treading a very fine, thin line here. But let's listen to this furthermore.
There's a lot to unpack. So, okay, so I love the fact that you did grow up with your mom being Christian and your father being Muslim. So you're speaking from a place of not necessarily being outside, right?
No, I was inside. I lived it.
Yeah, so like you understood and understand like the foundation of the religions.
Absolutely.
You've also gone into speaking on about just like what you refer to as toxic Christianity and toxic Islam, right? So what you're speaking on now, and this is my view of it, is the toxic version of both faiths. I think your viewpoint of the faiths practiced in their pure form isn't necessarily expressed with what you're explaining, right? Because what you're explaining now is basically saying, hey, it's up to God to change it. It's not up to us to change it.
Absolutely.
But that
in its pure form, I have no issue with Islam or Christianity, except what appears to be a justification for enslavement. That's the only doctrinal issue I have with both faiths. I don't think anyone should justify enslavement, definitely not a religion. But outside of that, purely in terms of what they believe and what they profess, it may not necessarily be for me, but I don't take issue with it. The enemy of African people is not the faith, but the way in which it is taught and the way in which it is weaponized against African independence.
right.
So you see the quick cleanup. That's the quick cleanup. See, that was what I was alluding to. You see, true Christianity is not the problem, right? And he caught it. Although he's putting Christianity and Islam on equal footing, as me as a diehard Christian believer, I don't put them on equal footing. I think, we all know that Christians, what we believe, professing Jesus Christ as the Messiah. But the point I wanted to make, and the reason why I stopped it here, you can clearly see where Doctor caught himself, because he's a very, very shrewd young man. He's not stupid. He caught himself, and then he went on to try to clean it up, right, a little bit. So just a little bit, saying that, it's not Christianity. True Christianity is purest form. True Islam is not an enemy. So that was the catch. But let's see if he keeps cleaning it, or does he fall back into the other thought process.
Right, and I would agree there, and I think that like to our defense, I think that when you look at the history of Christianity, there is toxicity. There was toxic origins a lot of the time, with the faith even being like instilled, especially within the Black community. The Black church in itself developed amongst Jim Crow, amongst
and
slavery.
Every Christian denomination approved of slavery at one time or another.
Well, and when you say approved, though,
some churches they own slaves. The church itself was a slave owner and a slave seller. Now you did have a few denominations, some Quakers, but not all, because there were slave owning Quakers. You had a few, but when you look at the majority of the denominations, and there's hundreds of them, most of them either participated in slavery or approved it outright.
Right, and that's really why I want to touch on the Black church, because of course the Black church didn't own the slaves. And when I think about ownership today, right, and just like these discussions that are happening, you have different groups speaking on the importance of like minority ownership. When I look at the Black church is something that we do own, and there is like a long history about it, right? So like when you look at so we actually, surprisingly enough, right, in Philadelphia, that's apparently the oldest independent African American denomination is, and I'm reading this now, called the African American Episcopal Church. You probably know about this more than me.
I'm not sure if it's older than AME, African Methodist Episcopal.
Well, this is just research I've done. But it supposedly was started in 1794. And look, my point in that is really more so to just touch on the fact that this is something that's like grown with time. So like when you look at even in the times of Jim Crow, many of the leaders in the Black church had leadership positions while being subservient in working society. To some degree.
No, I agree with you. Early Black Christianity, especially coming here out of Philadelphia, when you look at Absalom Jones,
Yeah.
you look at Richard Allen, who protested against white church because they were not allowed to pray in the pulpit with white people. They were relegated to the back. So they walked out. And out of that came the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is the largest Black independent white and one of the oldest.
Yeah.
There's debate there because there's about 3 different churches who claim to be the oldest.
Yeah.
Just like we got 3 different HBCUs in Wilberforce, Cheney, and Lincoln who claim to be the oldest, but
there's
they're
no
the oldest, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at that, AME coming out of that protest, had I been back then, I may have been in AME, not for purposes of Jesus, but for purposes that you're fighting against white supremacy. I look at Absalom Jones and him starting, he also became one of the first.
So right there, again, Christianity in its truest form. We know that what he said is a direct reminiscent of something that took place in Jesus' day. If you remember, there were people that were in Jesus' camp who were not there for the sake of salvation. They were not there to hear the message of the gospel. We know this to be true because we know that there were a lot of people who supported Jesus back in those days, just like you hear the confusion that's going on today, that the Messiah was supposed to be a warrior king. And he was supposed to come back to overpower the world's leaders, right, and reestablish Israel back on the top of the throne. So a lot of this concept of what Dr. Umar is saying existed back in Jesus' day. We know this to be true because when it was found out that Jesus was not the type of Messiah that they wanted him to be, many of his so-called followers, they walked away from him and walked with him no more. And then Jesus made it clear. He said, if they were with us, if they were of us, they would be with us. But they weren't made out of us. In other words, my Father in heaven was not reaching them like he's reaching you guys who stayed behind. That's why he asked Peter, said, who do you say that I am? And he said, you are the Messiah. Well, he asked him 3 times, actually. And the 3rd time, Peter says, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God, right? And so Jesus immediately goes in to say, flesh and blood did not reveal that to you, Cephas, but my Father in heaven. In other words, Jesus is telling you that this is where the line is drawn in the sand. Those people that were following him, like Dr. Umar, those revolutionaries, see, Umar is not hiding. He's only want to be a part of the church as long as they're fighting against the political power structure of the world. Just like in Jesus' day, the political power structure of the world was the Roman government. The Roman government was suppressing the Israeli people and the Hebrew people. And so there were a lot of people that were in Jesus' camp because they wanted to see if he was the Messiah, the war king Messiah, the one that they talk about coming back in Revelation. So that's why this tonality seems the same. But I'm going to jump ahead for the sake of this video so we can talk about another particular part. Stay with me.
The right approach per se, because
that has often been the excuse used for why churches don't play a more direct role in the struggle. So you take me. I'm a certified school psychologist.
Yes.
You're having issues with your son.
Yes.
They want to label him autistic, LD, ADHD, ED, whatever the case may be, right?
Yes.
So I say to you, you say, Doc, can you go with me to the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
I say, you know what? I can't go with you to the meeting, but I'm going to equip you with everything that you can, that you will need in order to be successful in the meeting. Which I do that because I can't be everywhere at all times. Right. But if you say, hey, we got to protest the government against the way in which Black kids are being over-identified, I'm in the front of that. I'm forefront in that. You understand me?
Yeah.
I cannot lead from the back. I cannot say I'm going to tell y'all everything wrong with the American white power structure and then myself not participate in that actual fight to transform the American white power structure. So when the church says, I'm not going to fight, but I'm going to equip my flock so that they can take up that fight, that's somewhat cowardly. You should be equipping them and preparing them. That's important. But what is your role in that fight? Every religious personality in history, I don't care if we deal with Moses, Jesus, Abraham, I don't care if we deal with Muhammad, I don't care if we come into contemporary times and deal with a Mahatma Gandhi, who was a racist, or Dr. King, or Malcolm X, Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Honorable Marcus Garvey. Any leader who professed a faith, if he was sincere in his faith, automatically became politically relevant. Jesus, by virtue of his work, automatically came to the attention of the government. You couldn't keep him out of it. Because if I'm fighting for people, I have to take on the enemies of my people. Dr. King automatically became relevant. Mahatma Gandhi in India automatically became relevant. There's no such thing as I'm a pious man, a pious woman. My life is dedicated to spreading the gospel of Christ and preparing my people for a relationship with the Almighty, but my life doesn't matter in the everyday lives of my own people. Show me where that exists in the Bible. Show me where that exists in the Quran. How can you be so in love with God that you're comfortable with your people living in hell?
And
So let me just stop it right there because, again, when you're talking to a minister of the gospel, and again, we're talking about the truth of Christianity in its purest form, and I'm going to keep referring to that. And you're starting to probably understand why and where this is going. As you can see, the young minister on this panel here, he looks like more or less Dr. Umar is interviewing him than him doing the interviewing because Umar has taken almost total control of the interview because of the questions and the rebuttals that has this man confused. The first thing is first, you see Dr. Umar kind of talking out of kind of almost both sides, right? Because at first he says that back in the beginning, when we first started, he was very adamant about us not uh, um, you know the leadership and how leaders are supposed to operate, and you know Christian and the faith teaches you to be passive and things like that. But at the end of the day, what we saw with Christ when we looked at his followers, he had financiers in there because remember, I think Judas and them pretty much handled the money. They would go to town and pay for certain things. So he had somebody in the organization uh, holding the money. He had a tax collector, somebody watching the taxes that they owed. You had fishermen, right? So even Jesus Christ, and he even had access to Nicodemus, right? One of the lawmakers, the Pharisees. So he had a well-rounded group of people around him. Why? Because this man's job, just like my job is to preach and teach the gospel in its most authentic view. Because remember, true Christianity is not like what Dr. Umar Johnson is talking about. There is not one leader on this earth that is the leader of the Christian community. Remember, we don't support the office of the papacy. The reason why we don't support the office of the papacy and we don't teach the office of the papacy, you can see it on our YouTube channel, is because we agree with what Christ said. This shall not be so. We talked about that in the book of Matthew and in Luke when the apostle said, "Who amongst us is the greatest?" Meaning, like, who's going to take over when you pass away or go to back to heaven or what have you? And Jesus immediately ambushed them and said, "Oh, no, 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 no. We're not doing that. The kingdoms of the world, the Gentile communities of the world, in other words, everybody else does that. They operate like that with the hierarchy system. But with you, this shall not be so." So we already know that the Christian community that we see today has ultimately violated that. How do we know? Because you see the office of the papacy, you see priests, you see cardinals, you even see in the so-called Protestant movement, you see bishops, Bishop T.D. Jakes, you see reverends, Reverend Al Sharptons, you see all these titles flying around. You see one-man pastoral systems where there's only one pastor running the show and everybody else is under them for decades, right? So you don't see this ye all brethren mentality when you go to your everyday local church USA. And I get that, and that's why we're doing this video, because we have to understand that the dirty laundry has to be unpacked. So right now, the dirty laundry is literally being thrown all over the floor by Dr. Umar Johnson. But the reality of it is that this young man, what he should have said is, no, it is my job to teach the gospel. Because the Christianity that we have today is raising up people from all walks of life. See, what he doesn't understand is that Christianity is the baseline of everything. That's why you can have Christian judges, a Christian president, a Christian ball player, a Christian teacher, a Christian doctor, a Christian lawyer, a Christian psychologist, a Christian insurance broker, a Christian light distributor, a Christian a gym teacher. See, what he doesn't understand is that the baseline of everybody is teaching Christianity, because remember, God came out to the Gentile communities through, through Minister Paul. So the reason why the church moves so effectively now, is as it should, is because God now has agents working on his behalf in all walks of life. So if they're getting the true teaching and the truth of the gospel, when that judge is in his judge seat, he's making the right decisions. When that police officer who's a Christian in his heart and in his mind, and he's out there policing, he's making the right policing decisions. The teachers are making the right teaching decisions. See, what you don't understand is that what Umar Johnson is telling this guy, he should have said, first of all, my job, my particular job, which I think it is to preach the gospel authentically. And when we do that, God has people in all different places that are getting fed the truth of the gospel. And now they're able to go back into their places of work. They're able to go back into their homes. They're able to go back wherever they are and bring the message of the truth of the gospel wherever they are. That's why it says we are the salt of the earth. We are the light of the world. This is how you should have explained that to Dr. Umar Johnson. So no, there is not one person that's going to stand up. When the social injustices are happening, when God's people are all around and in the key positions where they are, those things will be attacked organically because you got God's people everywhere. You know, a little joke I'm going to go with. I remember when, I started playing basketball, and there was other things I did, but for the sake of this one, I started playing basketball, and I started playing all around, playing in different parks, playing, and I can't tell you how many times I may have been in an uncomfortable situation, and somebody recognized me from the basketball court and be like, "Oh, yo, what's up, man? How you doing, man? Well, hey, what's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, thank God," right? Thank God, I know this guy, right? And that would happen a lot. Like, if anybody's from New York, it's all five boroughs, Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, and all that. And everybody know, yeah, New York, but we all know who come from there that there's a lot of competition amongst the boroughs. So it's not like everybody's going to like you if you're from the Bronx or from Queens or from Brooklyn and so on and so forth. We all know about the inner rivalries. But the point I'm making is that through basketball, it gave me a leg up in a lot of the five boroughs because a lot of ball players, they travel in the same circles, even though they're from different boroughs. So there's almost like a brotherhood. Same thing happens in the military. Guys know that as well. People from the same area, they all of a sudden they bond. So Christianity, I know that's kind of like a watered down version of it, but the Christianity is kind of like that. You got people in all different organizations, and when you come in there, you might be in there one day, and you might get pulled over, let's say, by four police officers, and they going in on you, and they doing all, and one of them could be a Christian who's working with the truth of the gospel. And that one police officer has the power to tell the other three, hey, guys, stand down. Let me talk to this guy. I got this. You know what I'm saying? That's life changing. See, that's what true Christianity looks like, Dr. Umar Johnson. So what you're talking about happens organically when you teach the truth of the gospel. And this young pastor, he should have known that. He should have known that. We're going to jump over to this next important slide, because this one is the real piece where rubber meets the road. Check this one. So I want you to pay extra careful attention to this particular piece of the message, and the reason why is because, again, if you remember what I said earlier, this is an example of how Umar Johnson, Dr. Umar Johnson, is actually trying to mobilize the church into a political power, right, and a political force. And although at first glance nothing appears to be wrong with what he's about to talk about, the thing I want us to pay close attention to, which I've been trying to ring as loud as the bells can ring, is that in true and authentic Christianity, there's a certain way that true believers go about their daily business. And a lot of the things that what Dr. Umar is talking about is conflictual with that. But let's see if you can hear it in his message.
We're trying our best to enhance our community and uplift our community. And I know for a fact that there are some churches that are doing a lot to actually like benefit the community around them. But
Time out. I want to ask you something.
Okay.
I want you to continue.
Yeah.
Churches do care.
Yeah.
Churches do a lot.
Yeah.
But with the church being the oldest political bulwark in the Black community, it's not just about caring about people. It's not just about doing a lot. You have to attack the 5 major problems that Black people have, which are miseducation, mass incarceration,
yes,
gentrification, police genocide, and access to wealth, also known as economic apartheid. The Black church must lend itself directly to challenging those 5 major problems and or creating the 6 major institutions that we need. Schools for our children, hospitals to take care of our people, supermarkets to feed our people, manufacturing sector to employ our people, distribution to give them the needs that they want, and the banks to invest in our people. So you must be dealing with one of the 5 ills, and you must be constructing institutions to address those 5 things that we need. The Black church isn't doing that. And one of the reasons why many Black churches aren't doing it. And again, there's exceptions. Let me give you this. One of the reasons why they're not doing it is because in the year 2000, President George Bush, former President Bush, the son, he made it possible for churches to qualify for federal funding, faith-based initiative, FBI. And I would argue that the Black church is, metaphorically, the new FBI, the new agent, because ever since George Bush made it possible for Black churches to qualify for federal funds, they have not been on the front line of any fight. You can't name me a church in any city, in any state in this country that is at the forefront. I didn't say participating. I said leading, galvanizing, at the forefront to improve the public schools, at the forefront to change mass incarceration, at the forefront to deal with gentrification and homelessness, at the forefront of police genocide, at the forefront of economic apartheid. I don't mean I came to the meeting. I don't mean I walked in the march. I mean you are galvanizing at the front like an Absalom Jones or Richard Allen or Dr. King or El Hajj Malik El Shabazz. And when I say church, I'm not singling out Christianity. I want to be clear for the viewers and for you. When I say church, I'm speaking inclusively of all Black religion. That means Muslims too. This is Philadelphia. We have more African American Sunni Orthodox Muslims than any city in America. And guess what? The mass gens in this city, they're doing next to nothing either about mass incarceration, miseducation, gentrification, police genocide, and access to wealth. So when I say church, this is not a Christian thing. I'm talking Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm talking even African traditionalists. You understand me? We are too passive and docile when it comes to marrying our religious faith in the fight for justice. And see,
so there's a bunch of bags to unpack with that, but I'm going to unpack them real nice and easy and quick for you, because one of the things that is going to keep ringing sentiment is, and basically Dr. Umar laid all his cards out on the table. Technically, we could stop this here. But I'm not going to do that because there are a couple other things I want to highlight before we get there. But the most important thing is that, again, he laid all his cards out on the table. So the first bag to unpack is what we spoke about. He's looking for not just a Christian church, but for all churches to come into this this social umbrella or this social one-stop shop, and again to revolutionize the benefits of especially African American people, which is pretty much his primary agenda. But here's the thing. Again, we talked about this. This is why it's very important. Like I said, nothing against the young minister here, but it's very important when someone like this is throwing all these things at you all at once. You know, you have to really be able to realistically say, well, first of all, first things first, when the church is functioning under its normal conditions, the way Christ ordered it. Because remember, in the New Testament. What did it say? Right? In the Acts of the Apostles, if you remember before, right after Christ had gone on to be with the Lord, his it talked about how the church actually grew. It said that they lacked nothing, right? Each one sharing everything that they had, right? And so back in those days in the early church, the church was built for each one to teach one, right? It was built for one hand helps the other, right? And so I know I'm ad-libbing a little bit, but at the early church, they shared everything. They shared their homes, they shared their food, they shared all their resources, right? So Christianity in its truest form is a sharing of resources so that the people lacked nothing. That came right out of the scriptures. And when that happens, there really is not a need to need social programs, which is basically what he's saying, if the church is functioning properly. Okay, so I'm gonna give him that. The second thing I'm gonna give him is that he's absolutely right about what took place under George Bush, because this is the primary reason why, if you realize there have been certain things happening in the world that has been a direct, we call it slap in the face of the Christian community. A few things, such as prayer leaving the school systems, Ten Commandments being taken down, and a lot of things being separated that has anything to do with godliness, anything to do with God, the revising of the Pledge of Allegiance. And so a lot of Christians have felt that slap. We've also had politicians that have gotten into office and have promoted a lot of anti-Christian movements, a lot of anti-Christian groups, and a lot of things going on in Congress that a lot of Christians are not happy with. And I always used to sit back and say, how in the world are they getting by with this? How are these laws passing, right? Like, how is this possible when you have such a strong Christian community? And he pretty much hit it on the head, because a lot of things are not being challenged even in the pulpits on Sunday. If you notice, if you listen to a lot of the tonality, you don't hear a lot of talk about homosexuality anymore, and child abuse and a lot of things like that. You don't hear a lot of that conversation in the pulpits anymore, at least not from a Christian perspective. You hear it from everybody else's perspective. And basically, what Umar Johnson is admitting to is that there was a lot of hush money being pushed around these so called churches, as we call them. Most of these people are just organizations, in my opinion. And a lot of these organizations that's camouflaging as churches have received these funds. And he's absolutely right. When you are taking funds and other people's monies, you have a tendency to lose control and authority over the message in which you want to teach and preach. Like, case in point, for example, YouTube. We all know, Instagram, YouTube, and social platforms like that. We all know that those social platforms uh, have taboo against certain things. Like, there's certain things you can't put out there on a social platform until they eventually shut you down and they ban you so that you can't talk anymore. So in a lot of ways, it's similar to that, right? In other words, if you're taking somebody's money, you have to move to the beat of their drum. So what Dr. Umar Johnson is doing is just admitting to what most of us have already figured out. Like, we see the silence of the churches on a lot of controversial topics that we know are not supported by the Bible. And yet, a lot of us stand pat. I think we just saw a big case in the Supreme Court where they were trying to make a woman make a birthday cake for somebody that was in the homosexual community. And she said, my theological and my Christian beliefs, I can't do that. But they were trying to make her do it anyway. So you kind of see where this is going, right? So I will commend Dr. Johnson for that. But the thing is, again, he's putting everything in one ball, and he's trying to promote it that Christians are to be at the forefront of all political movements. My belief, based on scripture, is that if Christians just operate in the way that Jesus Christ laid it out for us to operate, like we were doing back in Acts, like he told them in Matthew and Luke, ye shall not be like the kingdoms of the world. You are all brethren. See, when you are all brethren, that means you have equal foot, equal share, equal care. That means that the lack reduces when everyone is working together. There's nothing like team ball and team resources and attacking as a team will always be the number one way to combat a lot of these social uh, problems. But let's jump ahead a little bit and listen to a little bit more. So again, I want you to hear it in his words, basically what I just said about the compromise that the church, these organizations have put themselves in once they start operating with the resources, the finances, the way they do. So he'll tell you the way he sees it, and he's pretty much accurate with this as well.
So many black churches is that they have already aligned themselves with a European controlled income stream that doesn't have the black community as its priority. So if I'm a black church in Philadelphia, my church has already gotten a grant from my city councilman, my mayor, my governor, a grant from Bill Gates, a grant from the Rockefellers. I've already aligned myself with an agenda that's anti-African. Could I?
Well, I'm going to stop it right there because I want to make sure you understand where I'm coming from. It's not an agenda that's anti-African. That's part of it. But the biggest part of it is it's an agenda that's anti-Christian. See, the antichrist came into the community of churches by way of what he's talking about: resources, funding, all types of resources, all types of protections and security. So he's talking about from a black perspective. But again, if this pastor or this young minister was on top of his spiritual game, he could have shot that down right there and say again, when you do Christianity at its purest form, and again, Dr. Umar Johnson, make no mistake, he doesn't apologize for him being very pro-black. At least that's what he says on the surface. And from what we see, his message and his lifestyle appears to line up with that for now. But my point is that what we teach is Christianity comes first. Remember, he is against that. If you remember, he said before Moses, before all these people, he was. Now, that sounds like a very, um, demonic approach. Who's the last person to say that kind of stuff? Um, we all know that Christ said it, and we know he's not Christ. Now, we do understand what he's making the attempt to say, that black man is the original man. And he has his right to say that because evidence to show that. But what he's not highlighting here is what I really wanted to talk about in my book is that what went on between the original man and God, because there was some breakdowns there that Dr. Umar Johnson will not discuss, at least not in this setting, I don't believe. But to my point, what he's saying is not anti-black, is anti-Christian.
Eliminate the relationship, I could. The problem is, I need this money. I'm now used to this money. I'm dependent on this money, which is why I take issue when the black church says we don't get involved in politics. You're an absolute lie. Where is the first stop a mayoral candidate makes on his campaign trail? What's the first stop a U.S. senator candidate, a U.S. House of Representatives candidate, a state rep, a state senator, a alderwoman, an alderman, a council person, the first place they go to get votes is where? The black church. So if you're not into politics, why is your pulpit safe for every lying candidate in your city to come up there and bombast their so-called agenda that they know they're never going to carry out? Wow. If you are not political, stop endorsing political candidates. Stop giving them your microphone on Sunday because they're not delivering anything to black people after they win. And the money that you use, you can't use it for the good of black people anyway, because another problem with the black church and the grant money they get, it handcuffs you to a multicultural agenda. So every time you hear black religious leaders talk, they're always talking about everybody. We're multicultural, all poor people, all non-whites. We're for everybody. We don't see color. That's a problem. You know why?
So, yeah, he's hitting it out the park. Like I said, he's hitting it out the park. Don't get me wrong. The problem is what he's hitting out the park is missing the mark. The mark is that, again, when we discuss true, authentic Christianity, it is for all people who has a heart after Christ. See, a lot of the social issues that he's talking about when he's talking about white people and these lawmakers and stuff like that, if Christianity was operating in its purest form, and we said this over and over again, when God has agents of Christianity in all of these key places, on the board of electives, in Congress, in the House of Legislation, in the judicial system, in the executive branches. When Christians are spread throughout all of these different organizations that run the world, you have a better world. If they're operating in authentic Christianity, you just have a better world. And so the very thing that he's talking about, these injustices, is not because people are operating on the behalf of what's right. Now, again, there is a line to draw in the sand. We know that as Christians, there's going to be struggles on the earth as long as this particular part of the equation is in play. In other words, what is in play? What's in play right now is that true Christians understand that there is a prophetic aspect to what's going on around us as well. This is why it's important to understand your word and to be under the right ministry. Because a lot of these things that he's talking about, God already told us was going to happen. Jesus told us these things were going to happen, and he said they had to happen in order to usher in the second coming. So, yeah, it's complicated because at the same time, you're like, yeah, we want this. But then we're like, no, we don't want this. We don't want this. But no matter what, we understand that things are happening in real time. There's going to have to be a lot of different things occurring to usher in the second coming. So a lot of these social injustices are obviously going to continue to take place. The other thing we want to make clear, and he's absolutely right, when he's talking about the compromise position that these organizations slash churches are in once they put these political candidates out there. Now, let's be realistic. He's right. The bottom line is that a lot of the reasons why the Christian authority is being lost in by leaps and bounds in government and things like that, why they're kicking it out, is because true Christians are still voting for the types of candidates that are pushing these agendas. And he's right. If you have a problem with the things that's going on in the public school systems that are surrounding your children, and you don't think your children should be taught, certain things about what's going on in, the LGBT community, if you think that there's certain things, that there's certain lines that have to be drawn in the sand about certain programs, that are on television, you don't think your children should be watching certain social media apps that your children shouldn't have access, and you don't, if you have a problem with those things, then as a Christian, and you do have a voice in who you vote for, because obviously you can vote for whoever you want, because you've been taught the things of Christianity, you've been taught what true Christianity looks like. At least I hope you have. But if you really are operating that way, why would you vote for these candidates that are not promoting your Christian morals and goals? You shouldn't vote for them in the first place. So Dr. Umar Johnson is absolutely right. I'm not saying that, it doesn't happen once in a while, but, after a while, these candidates that come up into these organizations slash churches and you see that they haven't delivered, why do you keep supporting them? So he's absolutely right. I don't have anything wrong with what he just said. But the problem that what he's saying, again, he's still looking at it from a black perspective, which, again, as people of color, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, what is more important to us? Being black and pushing the black agenda, or pushing the Christian agenda? Now, we'll talk about it more in the book, but the reality of it is, in the Christian agenda, a lot of the things that the black community is suffering from wouldn't exist if the Christian agenda was at the forefront. But what I see in the black community are a lot of the things that hurt us from another person, another being's agenda, and it ain't godliness. The selfishness, the we don't work together, we don't look out for each other, we're killing each other, yada yada yada. That's not a godly agenda. That's someone else's agenda. You know what I'm saying? So I beg to differ. I think if people of color stayed into the Christian agenda, I believe that a lot of the stuff that Dr. Umar is fighting and protesting wouldn't even be there to protest. That's what I feel.
Because for all the holiness that black religion preaches, they're not holy at all. I don't mean Holy, I mean WHOLE, whole. Because in order for the church to be whole, I have to be able to talk about economic problems at the church. I have to be able to talk about issues of violence and crime at the church. I have to be able to talk about political problems and medical problems and educational problems. But in the black church, so often you're told outright, and I've been in these meetings, we can't discuss that here. Why not? Are you not concerned with the black community? Why can't we talk about police brutality? Why can't we talk about the economic exploitation by Koreans and Arabs and everybody else? Why can't we talk about the political neglect of our elected officials? This is the place of God. We pray. We don't get involved in that. And that's why we're finishing dead last, because guess what? Everybody else's house of worship is whole. It's truly holy. Not Holy, but WHOLELY. It's holy because after they pray to their God, the European Jews, they talk about how to get that money, how to look out for themselves politically. When the Arabs out there worshiping Allah, they can talk about how to get some more money in the black community. When the East Indians and the Latinos are done praying, they can stay right in their house of worship and talk about their political agenda, their economic agenda, their social agenda. Black people can't do that. We're the only people in America that have to go one place to pray and somewhere else to solve our problems.
Well, okay, and I hear that. But I do also know that there is some churches that
but you keep talking about some. When are we going to systematize it, brother?
Yeah.
I agree with you. I know some.
Yeah.
I know some.
Yeah.
And but when are we going to systematize it? Because the exception doesn't negate the rule.
No, right. And I guess what I didn't want to necessarily highlight the some of the few of the churches that are doing a good job. What I really wanted to say is, for those churches that aren't necessarily relying on, let's say, government funding to run their church, which I actually wasn't even aware of. To be honest, I didn't know that happened. But like, for let's say a church that's like running straight on like tithes and donations, right? And it's a black church. How should that church restructure itself so that it can better serve the community?
3 things every church should have.
Okay.
A bank. If not a bank outright, start a credit union. You can start a credit union with $250,000. Provide access to capital so black people can grow their own businesses. As you know, we're living at a time where we are witnessing the genocide and extinction of the 9-to-5, 40-hour job. There's going to be no jobs in America. You're going to have to make one. We're going to have to go into business for ourselves. The black bank needs to be empowering black people to start their own businesses. If you are not talking about economic empowerment, don't talk to me about God. Because the crime in our community, the devil's work, is being carried out by unemployed black men. The devil's work is being carried out by unemployed black women. The devil's work is being carried out by unemployed black youth. So if you care about limiting the spread of evil, you have to economically empower people. Because contrary to popular belief, money is not the root of all evil. Not having no damn money is the root of all evil. When you walk out of here today, you're not scared of millionaires. You're worried about little Mike, and Tay-Tay who ain't got no way to eat, and whether they're going to have to ski mask and pull a gun out on you because the black church isn't doing anything to give them an opportunity to earn a decent, livable wage. Where's the economic empowerment? That's one. Number 2, school. Every black church should have a school, and that school should be non-denominational. Here's another issue I have with black religion. And again, when I say church, I'm talking Muslims too. When they do happen to open up a learning center, because we have very few real schools ran by black religion in the country, which is unacceptable because most educators are aligned with the religion. Okay, there's very few non-religious educators. So where the schools at, right? But a big issue I take is the selfishness of black religion that says we're going to open up a school. But if you don't believe in Jesus Christ, your child can't come. If you don't accept Muhammad ibn Abdullah as the last messenger of God, your child can't come. That's selfish. During slavery,
are religious schools doing that?
All right, I'm going to close out and stop here. And I can go on and on, but I think I want to leave it on this note. Again, this minister, this young pastor, he's got to do more of his homework. I mean, let's just be realistic. You heard him throw out there some key facts, I will say, that the communities are being neglected by the black churches, is what his argument is. The problem is that, again, if you don't stick to your guns, and we said this over and over again, when the Christian community is functioning at its peak, there is no lack in the community. That's number one. So that's the first thing we want to make sure I communicate and over communicate that. And I will obviously touch on it even deeper in my book. But the reality of it is that when that is done, like I said, 99%, it's not going to be all, but 99% of the issues that he's bringing to the forefront in this interview would be non-existent. Because when resources are divided amongst the people, there is no lack. What he just said is Tay Tay and Day Day and all these people, you worried about them robbing you because there's a lack. There's a lack that creates the Tay Tays. The Tay Tays and the Day Days are created, which I beg to differ. He says there's talking about if you had the money. See, there's a lot of evil people that have money, Dr. Johnson. For example, a lot of the people with the big money that's pushing the drugs and the liquors and all the things into the inner city communities that create criminal activities, the illegal guns and things like that make their way into the inner cities into Tay Tay's hand. You know what I'm saying? Where those guns coming from that Tay Tay got? Where those drugs coming from, Dr. Johnson? They're coming from people with money, greedy people with money that pass these legislations and laws that take a lot of the jobs that you're talking about out of the communities and take them overseas. Those are big people with money. They're the ones that lobby and go down to Washington and lobby for certain laws to be passed so that their agenda is pushed. Those are people with money, Dr. Johnson. Because again, you're not looking at Christianity in its truest form. If Christianity at its truest form was operating, the people with money would have Christians amongst them saying, no, let's not push these jobs over to China and do business with China at the expense of Baltimore City and Chicago and a lot of these industrial towns that now these kids are walking the streets because they don't have jobs. Let's reappropriate the taxpayers' money and put it into rec centers that teach art, that teach science, after school programs that teach athleticism, after school programs that work on your general hygiene and how to eat properly and all that kind of stuff. Let's plant a garden. Let's do this. There's a lot of, like he said in the beginning, the misappropriation of funds. See, Dr. Johnson, you got it wrong. See, evil is in all empires. Yes, Tay Tay and Day Day and them are robbing people. But again, it goes back to something. Tay Tay and Day Day are robbing their own people. They're pushing an African American grandmother down the stairs and snatching her bag. They're robbing a young African American young man and carjacking him. They're raping a young African American young girl. Okay? Tay Tay and Day Day are hurting their own people. You know what I'm saying? So you can't get me to just shine this bright light on the African American community because, like Christians know, without true Christianity and without the heart of God inside of human beings, it doesn't matter what race that person is. It doesn't matter how big their bank account is or how small. It doesn't matter what community they live in. If they don't have the peace and the love of God in their hearts and the power of the Holy Spirit operating through them, breathing through them and moving through them, then there's no hope. There's no hope, Dr. Umar Johnson. There is no hope. So, yeah, I agree. The money could be well appropriated. Yes, I agree that Christians could take back positions in the seat, positions in the House, positions in the legal system, positions in law enforcement. Yeah, positions in schools. I agree. Christians can take that back. They can. You know, Although I don't believe it's going to be what we think, because I think scriptures have shown us over and over again that the deterioration of the world's systems have to come in place so that the end times can be ushered in, as we say, the sign of the times. So I'm going to close out with this. But what I hope to leave you with is that, one, I really wanted to bring out the reality of what is actually going on in the world around us, as far as how everyone looks at these so-called Christian communities. Because it's not just Dr. Umar Johnson that's highlighting this. Yes, he has a bigger platform to do it. But the reality of it is everyone is looking at this. And because of that, there's only a few things that can be done. Now, obviously, the book that I'm writing, Dirty Laundry, is going to be out sometime, next year, what have you, and that'll bring a lot of these issues to the forefront. But the bottom line, everybody's not going to read that book. Everybody might even watch this video. They might not even see. But the point I'm making is that one thing as a believer is you have to be true to the teachings of Jesus Christ. That you must be. And no matter what you do, you cannot let somebody pull wool over your eyes when you know the truth. I'm Ron G, Minister Ron. Enjoyed your time. Hope you got something out of this video. We'll talk soon. God bless.